The year was 410, and Rome, the once invincible capital of the Roman Empire, was burning. Flames licked at the marble columns of ancient temples, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke. Panic-stricken citizens ran through the streets, their faces twisted with fear and despair. The Visigoths, a Germanic tribe led by their chieftain Alaric, had breached the city's walls and were rampaging through its streets. For the first time in almost 800 years, Rome was under attack. The city that had stood as a symbol of power and order was now a chaotic battleground. The Visigoths, who had been promised land and safety within the empire, had grown tired of broken promises. They wanted a place to call their own, and when the Roman Emperor Honorius refused to give it to them, they took matters into their own hands. The fall of Rome was not just a military defeat, it was a shock to the entire Western world. People everywhere wondered if the mighty Roman Empire could truly be falling apart. But the story of Rome's fall is more than just a tale of violence and destruction. It's a story of change, of how one world ended and another began. For centuries, the Roman Empire had been the center of the known world, a vast and powerful entity that stretched from the British Isles to the deserts of Syria. But by the early 400s, things were changing. The empire was splitting into two parts, the eastern half, with its capital in Constantinople, and the western half, with its capital in Rome. The Eastern Empire was still strong, but the Western Empire was weakening. The weakening of the Western Empire was not sudden. It had been happening for decades, even centuries. The Roman army, once the most fearsome fighting force in the world, was now filled with Germanic tribesmen who were more loyal to their own chieftains than to the Roman state. These tribesmen, including the Visigoths, had been allowed to settle within the empire's borders as a way to keep them from attacking. But as more and more of them moved in, the Roman government struggled to control them. When the Visigoths finally decided to take matters into their own hands, the Western Empire was already on the brink of collapse. The fall of Rome in 410 was a symbolic turning point, but it was not the end. The Western Empire limped on for a few more decades, but it was a shadow of its former self. Cities decayed, trade routes disappeared, and the once powerful Roman legions disintegrated. People who had lived in cities for generations were forced to move to the countryside, where they could grow their own food and defend themselves. The world was becoming more local, more fragmented, and more violent. In the midst of this chaos, the Catholic Church emerged as a source of stability. While the Roman state was crumbling, the Church was growing stronger. Christian leaders like Ambrose, Jerome, and Augustine were writing influential works that would shape the future of Western civilization. They were trying to make sense of the world around them, to find meaning in the chaos. Augustine, in particular, wrote a book called The City of God to explain why Rome had fallen. He argued that the cities of man, no matter how great, would always fall, but the Church, God's kingdom on earth, would endure. The fall of Rome was not just the end of an empire, it was the beginning of a new era. The Middle Ages, a period that would last for nearly 1,000 years, were about to begin. It was a time of great change, a time when new kingdoms would rise from the ashes of the old, and when the people of Europe would have to find new ways to live, to believe, and to understand the world around them. The story of how this new world emerged from the ruins of the old is a story of resilience, of hope, and of the human spirit's ability to adapt and thrive, even in the darkest of times. In the year 530, Emperor Justinian of the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, embarked on a grand mission. He dreamed of reuniting the old Roman Empire, which had been split into the eastern and western halves. His goal was to reclaim the lost territories in North Africa, Italy, and Spain from the Vandals, Ostrogoths, and Visigoths. Justinian's efforts were immortalized by his court historian, Procopius, in History of the Wars, a detailed account of the military campaigns. However, Procopius also wrote a secret, and much more critical work called The Secret History. In this book, Procopius reveals a darker side of Justinian and his wife, Theodora. He claims that while he could not safely tell the truth while Justinian and Theodora were alive, now he could expose their true nature. According to Procopius, Justinian was a deceitful, hypocritical, and treacherous ruler who was obsessed with murder and plunder. Theodora, once a circus dancer and prostitute, is portrayed as a manipulative and promiscuous woman who had a profound and often negative influence on her husband. Despite the harsh criticism, Procopius's accounts highlight the significant consequences of Justinian's ambitions. Initially, Justinian's campaigns were successful. His general, Belisarius, managed to reconquer North Africa from the Vandals and Sicily, and even pushed the Ostrogoths out of Ravenna. In 536, with the help of the Pope, Justinian's troops entered Rome, and for a moment, it seemed as though the old Roman Empire might be reborn. However, the triumph was short-lived. The Ostrogoths fought back fiercely in Italy, forcing Justinian to withdraw troops from other borders, including the Danube and the Eastern Front. This left the empire vulnerable to attacks from the Persians, who launched their own invasions. Meanwhile, the Slavs from the north invaded Greece and the Balkans, and in 542, a devastating plague struck Constantinople, killing a third of its population. The combination of these disasters weakened the Byzantine Empire. Justinian struggled to maintain control over the vast territories he had conquered. Italy, once the heart of the Roman Empire, was left in ruins, with cities destroyed and centralized government collapsing into small local units. The same fate befell North Africa and Spain, where the defeated Vandals left a power vacuum. The Lombards, a fierce Germanic tribe, took advantage of the chaos and invaded Italy in 568, further destabilizing the region. By the time Justinian died in 565, his ambitious dreams had largely failed. Instead of a reunited Roman Empire, he left behind a weakened Byzantine Empire burdened by debt, religious conflicts, and a corrupt bureaucracy. The Eastern Empire barely held together, while the Western territories were left in disarray, ripe for future conquests by the Muslims and the Lombards. The death of Justinian marks the end of an era known as Late Antiquity. His successor, Heraclius, managed to defeat the Persians and save Constantinople, but the empire never fully recovered. In the meantime, a new and powerful force was rising in the Middle East: Islam. Islam, founded by the Prophet Muhammad around 610, spread rapidly across the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Europe. Muhammad, a caravan manager and later a holy warrior, claimed that the Archangel Gabriel revealed to him the teachings of Allah, the one true God. These teachings were recorded in the Quran, the holy book of Islam. Muhammad emphasized the importance of submission to Allah and promised eternal happiness to those who lived ethically and followed the 5 pillars of Islam. After Muhammad's death in 632, Islam continued to expand. Within a century, Muslim armies had conquered the Middle East, North Africa, Sicily, Western Italy, Spain, and even parts of southern France. The weakened Byzantine Empire and the fragmented kingdoms of Europe could not resist the Islamic advance. However, 2 key battles halted the Muslim expansion. In 718, Constantinople was saved from a Muslim siege by the use of Greek fire, an incendiary weapon. In 732, Charles Martel's forces defeated the Muslims at the Battle of Tours, driving them back to Spain. The Islamic world, with its wealth from trade and agriculture, became a center of learning and culture. Arab scholars preserved the works of Greek philosophers and scientists, particularly Aristotle, and made significant contributions to mathematics and medicine. Islamic Spain, known as Al-Andalus, was a hub of intellectual and cultural exchange where Muslims, Jews, and Christians coexisted relatively peacefully. In contrast, Western Europe was in a state of disarray. The once great cities of the Roman Empire were in ruins, and the population of Rome had decreased by 95%. The Roman road network was neglected, and trade and education declined. People lived in small, isolated villages, under the protection of local landowners. Life was hard, with malnutrition and early death being common. The church, however, remained a unifying force. It provided education, preserved Latin, and tended to the sick and the poor. Monasteries, guided by the rule of Saint Benedict, became centers of learning and spiritual life. The church also played a crucial role in the political landscape. In 751, Pippin III, the son of Charles Martel, deposed the last Merovingian king and established the Carolingian dynasty. The Pope, seeking protection against the Lombards and the Byzantines, blessed Pippin's reign. In return, Pippin defeated the Lombards and gifted the city of Ravenna to the Pope, expanding the Papal States. This alliance between church and state set the stage for the future of medieval Europe. After Charlemagne's death in 814, his vast empire began to crumble. His descendants couldn't hold it together, and the once great realm splintered into smaller, often warring states. Around the same time, Viking raiders started attacking the coasts of Europe, causing chaos and destruction. In Britain, the King of Wessex, Alfred the Great, managed to unite the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and push back the Vikings, bringing some stability to the region. In 911, the Carolingian dynasty, which Charlemagne founded, ended in Germany. In France, it lasted a bit longer, until 987, when Hugh Capet, the first Capetian king, took the throne. This marked the beginning of a new royal line in France. Meanwhile, in Germany, Otto I became a powerful figure. In 962, he was crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope in Rome, reviving the idea of a Christian empire to rival the Byzantine and Islamic ones. However, German attempts to expand into France and northern Italy didn't go well, and Europe became a patchwork of smaller, often hostile states. By around 1000, things started to get better in Europe. The economy grew stronger, thanks to new farming techniques and a warmer climate. People began to use water mills and windmills, which made life easier and more productive. Towns and cities started to grow, creating new markets and opportunities. Artisans, bankers, and merchants formed guilds to protect their interests and promote trade. Even warfare changed, with knights riding on horseback, armed with new technologies like stirrups and horseshoes. The 12th century brought a cultural renaissance. The works of ancient thinkers like Aristotle, along with commentaries from Arab scholars, were translated into Latin. This sparked a wave of learning and creativity. Universities were established in places like Bologna, Paris, Oxford, and Cambridge. Church music evolved from plainchant to polyphony, and architecture shifted from the heavy Romanesque style to the light and airy Gothic style. The church also went through major changes during this time. In 1054, the Great Schism formally split the Roman Catholic Church from the Eastern Orthodox Church. The two had been drifting apart for centuries over issues like the nature of the Holy Spirit and the use of leavened bread in the Eucharist. But the main issue was the Pope's claim to be the ultimate leader of the Church. In 1075, Pope Gregory VII issued the Dictatus Papae, asserting the Pope's supreme authority and the doctrine of papal infallibility. This led to the investiture controversy, a long struggle between the church and secular rulers over who had the right to appoint bishops and abbots. The conflict came to a head in 1077 when Emperor Henry IV, facing rebellion, had to humble himself before the Pope at Canossa to be forgiven. The dispute wasn't fully resolved until 1122 with the Concordat of Worms, which allowed both the church and the state to have a role in these appointments. The Crusades were another major event of this period. In 1095, Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade to secure Christian access to the Holy Land. The Crusaders, mostly French and Italian knights, captured Jerusalem in 1099, but holding onto it was difficult. Multiple subsequent crusades were launched, but they often failed to achieve their goals. The Fourth Crusade even ended with the sacking of Constantinople, weakening the Byzantine Empire. Despite their failures, the Crusades had some positive effects, such as reopening trade routes and bringing new ideas to Europe. The Crusades also fueled anti-Semitism, leading to pogroms and the expulsion of Jews from some European countries. In Spain, the Reconquista, the Christian drive to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule, gained momentum. El Cid, a famous warrior, had mixed success in this effort. By 1249, most of Spain was under Christian control, though Granada held out until 1492. In England, 1066 was a turning point when William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, defeated the English at the Battle of Hastings and became king. He brought Norman French to England and changed the country's language and culture. The Norman conquest also led to the creation of the Domesday Book, a detailed survey of England's lands and people. The 12th century saw powerful kings in France, England, and Germany. Louis VII of France, Henry II of England, and Frederick Barbarossa of Germany all had long reigns and significant impacts. Henry II's marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine gave him control over large parts of France, but it also led to family feuds and rebellions. His son Richard the Lionheart, with encouragement from Eleanor, rebelled against him, though the rebellion failed. Italy in the 12th century was a collection of independent city-states, often at odds with each other. These cities, like Venice, Florence, and Genoa, were inspired by the idea of republican government. The conflict between the Guelphs, who supported the Pope, and the Ghibellines, who backed the German emperor, added to the political turmoil. Despite the chaos, this period laid the groundwork for the Renaissance, a time of great cultural and intellectual flourishing in Italy and beyond. The 13th century was a time of great change and excitement in Europe. Imagine a world where new inventions and ideas were transforming daily life. This was the age of knights, castles, and chivalry, but it was also a time of rapid progress in many areas. One of the most significant inventions of this period was the mechanical clock. Before the clock, people relied on the church bells to mark the passing of time. With the clock, time became more precise and consistent, affecting how people organized their day. Glass windows started appearing in houses, making homes brighter and more comfortable. Eyeglasses, which were adapted from the Arabs, helped people see better, especially those who had trouble with their vision from working in dimly lit rooms. Spinning wheels sped up the production of thread and yarn, making clothing more affordable. Cotton fabric, produced in Spain, became popular, and coal mining in England provided a new source of fuel. Trade and commerce also saw significant improvements. New roads connected cities and towns, making travel easier. The compass and the fixed rudder made sea travel safer, and the travels of Marco Polo to China and Central Asia fueled a growing interest in exotic goods and spices. The merchant class grew in wealth and power, pushing for more autonomy and influence in society. Education was also changing. Schools associated with cathedrals taught the 7 liberal arts, which included grammar, rhetoric, logic, mathematics, geometry, music, and astronomy. These schools eventually evolved into universities, where students could study law, philosophy, and science. The works of Roman law, preserved by Justinian, became a model for legal systems across Europe. Students studied the writings of Cicero and Aristotle, and scholars like Duns Scotus, Meister Eckhart, and William of Ockham developed complex philosophical and theological systems. Literature and art flourished during this time. Troubadours from the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine sang love songs in Provençal, and national epics like the Song of Roland in France and the Nibelungenlied in Germany captured the imagination of people. The 13th and 14th centuries produced 2 of the greatest minds of the medieval world, Thomas Aquinas and Dante Alighieri. Thomas Aquinas developed a comprehensive synthesis of Christian theology and Aristotelian philosophy, while Dante's Divine Comedy remains one of the most important works in Western literature. The Church was also undergoing significant changes. St. Francis of Assisi and St. Dominic established new orders of mendicant friars, who dedicated themselves to poverty, service, and learning. However, these orders sometimes strayed from their original goals, and were used by the Church to extend its power. The Albigensian Crusade, led by the Dominicans, aimed to eliminate heresy in southern France, and the Papal Inquisition, established in 1233, targeted a wide range of heretics and nonbelievers. The 13th century was marked by a long period of peace, which allowed for cultural and economic growth. However, this peace came to an end in the 14th century. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 and the Black Death, which killed about 1/3 of Europe's population from 1346 to 1353, brought widespread suffering. The 100 Years' War, which began in 1337, saw intense fighting between England and France. Despite English victories at battles like Crecy and Poitiers, the war dragged on until 1453, with the English ultimately failing to achieve their goals. In England, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 marked the end of the feudal system. Peasants, who were angry about heavy taxes and restricted freedoms, demanded more economic and political rights. Although the revolt was ultimately suppressed, it showed that the old social order was breaking down. The last major crusade ended in 1396, with a devastating defeat of Christian knights by the Turks at the Battle of Nicopolis. The deposition of Richard II in 1399 by his cousin Henry Bolingbroke further challenged the idea of the divine right of kings. The 14th century was a time of turmoil and change, but it also saw the emergence of new ideas and a growing middle class. The works of medieval authors like Dante, Thomas Aquinas, and the troubadours continue to inspire and influence us today. The 13th century laid the foundation for the Renaissance, which would bring even more significant changes to the world. As we look back at the 13th and 14th centuries, we see the emergence of some of the most influential figures in Western history. Francis of Assisi and Thomas Aquinas reshaped religious thought in ways that continue to impact both believers and non-believers. Their teachings laid the groundwork for a deeper understanding of faith and reason, blending spirituality with intellectual rigor. In literature, Dante Alighieri, Giovanni Boccaccio, and Petrarch stand out as the three crowns of Italian literature. Dante's epic journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise in the Divine Comedy remains a cornerstone of Western literature, exploring the depths of human nature and the quest for divine wisdom. Boccaccio's Decameron offers a vivid portrait of life during the Black Death, blending humor, tragedy, and moral lesson. Petrarch, whose contributions I will explore in my next book on the Renaissance, bridged the medieval and Renaissance periods with his classical scholarship and lyric poetry. In England, Geoffrey Chaucer emerged as a literary genius, earning the title of the father of English poetry. His Canterbury Tales paint a rich tapestry of medieval life, from the noble to the common, and his influence on the English language and literature is immeasurable. Other significant works of the time, such as Jean Froissart's Chronicles and William Langland's Piers Plowman, are important for their historical insights but are less influential in the broader literary canon. Christianity played a central role in shaping medieval thought and culture. It provided a moral and intellectual framework that, while often seen as rigid, was more nuanced and open to pagan ideas than commonly believed. The story of Christianity's rise is filled with irony and transformation. Jesus, a humble Jewish prophet from Nazareth, preached a message of repentance and the imminent arrival of the kingdom of God. His crucifixion, initially a minor event, became the cornerstone of a new religion that spread rapidly among the Gentiles. Saul of Tarsus, later known as Paul, was pivotal in this transformation. His writings, which form a significant part of the New Testament, emphasize the spiritual kingdom of heaven and the divinity of Christ. Paul's teachings helped Christianity break free from its Jewish roots and appeal to a broader audience across the Roman Empire. Over time, the new religion diverged from its Jewish origins, sometimes even becoming hostile to them, a painful irony given its roots. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus provides a valuable account of the Jewish people's history, from the biblical creation to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE. The stories of figures like King David and Solomon and the building of the temple are central to Jewish identity. The Babylonian and Assyrian conquests led to the diaspora, scattering Jewish communities across the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Despite this, the Jewish faith endured, with synagogues and the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, helping to preserve their traditions. In the Roman Empire, Jews made up a significant portion of the population, and their messianic hopes persisted. They believed that God would send a Messiah to restore the Jewish kingdom and unite the lost tribes of Israel. The delay in the Messiah's arrival was attributed to their own failings, leading to a renewed focus on strict adherence to the Torah. The transformation of Jesus' message from a Jewish liberation movement to a global religion with a distinctly anti-Semitic undertone is a profound and complex story. Despite the political and religious challenges, Christianity eventually became the dominant institution in the Western world, shaping politics, culture, and intellectual life throughout the Middle Ages. As we reflect on this period, it is clear that the interplay between religion, literature, and history has left an indelible mark on Western civilization. The figures and events of the 13th and 14th centuries and the broader medieval period continue to inspire and challenge us, reminding us of the enduring power of human creativity and faith.